I really didn't start getting involved in a local church until I guess about 2 years ago. That's one of my biggest kind of regrets of leadership, is that I used it as an excuse. I had the conversation with my roommate a few times, and we were both just kind of going to campus church, and we would, use the excuse, well, we have our community on the hall. We are gathering together on, then it was on Sunday mornings. And so we would kind of tell ourselves, well, we're good right now. We're RAs, we have a lot of stuff going on. When I was in SLC, I had a lot of stuff going on. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I kind of realized the fault in that argument was that involvement in the church is different in community because it's sustainable. It continues on, and it's not just with people who are your age. There are people who are older, people who are younger. On your hall, everyone is, within 2 or 3 years of each other in age. And if you're in leadership, then you're not really being led. So that's kind of one of the biggest regrets for me as an SLC, was not being involved in the local church. I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give the SLCs is that the church is not something that is adding more to your schedule. It does in some ways, but it's a great opportunity to call your guys and your girls into biblical community. And a lot of times we try to be the Superman for them, and we want them to rely on us for, when they want counseling or when they want to talk about things. But we can't do it all for them. And so if we draw them into a community of believers where there are older men and older women, then it makes our job a lot easier. And it helps us out because a lot of times after the year's over, they expect us, and a lot of times we put the expectation on ourselves to continue those relationships, which some of them will continue, and that's awesome. And I still, from time to time, meet with guys who are prayer leaders of mine, but it's very difficult. And by putting them into and letting them follow you into a local body of believers in the community, that lasts more than a year. And so you are plugging them into a sustainable ministry that's going to continue, other than just trying to get them to rely on you and your limited experience and your limited wisdom for a year, and then try to stress yourself out for the next year to meet with your last year's team and this year's team and your students from 2 years ago. And now they can meet with people in your church, older men and older women, who most likely have more wisdom than you do to share with them for a longer period of time. Well, honestly, from the time, and I think this is true for a lot of our student leaders, from the time that I was, in high school, I was a leader in my youth group. I was, I preached some, I led the students, and then when I got to Liberty, my first week, I became a prayer leader, now a prayer and life group leader. And then I kind of ran from leadership, and the Lord kind of brought me back to it, and then I was in SLC, and in that moment I wasn't I didn't really get along with my RA too well, and he was just a year older than me, and so I didn't really see him as my leader. I saw him kind of more as a guy that I worked with who had more authority, some authority over me. And then even as an RA, I had an RD. He was an incredible guy. I wasn't very teachable at the time, and so I didn't really let him speak into my life either. And now, kind of looking back over the past, 4 years, I guess my 4 years here, I realized that I hadn't been led at all. And so I didn't really have anyone teaching me, well, how do you be a good husband? Or how do you, one day when you have kids, how do you be a good dad? What's an example of that? And so when I left here, I didn't really have anybody to pour into me for the year that I was not at Liberty. And so now when I got back, I realized like, hey, I don't have anyone older than me like speaking truth in my life, calling me out on my sin, calling me out on my excuses. I don't have anyone like encouraging me in when I do the things of the Lord, or showing me how to live life on mission in the real world in a normal everyday job, with a family and all of these things. And so when I finally got into the church and began to spend time with Eric, who's the youth pastor at my church, and RT, another guy who's a leader, who's older, and he has a family, and even guys who were younger than me who were involved. And I began to see how they lived mission with a family and with all of these other things going on. It was so important for me to be led. That has been one of the most beneficial things for me, is just being able to watch people who are not afraid to call me out and who don't know what an RD is, and they, just see me and they say, hey, you're being prideful, or hey, are you loving your wife this week, or are you telling people about Jesus, are you spending time with Jesus? And so I think that's one of the most important things for me in being led, is having people call me out instead of just being the one calling others out. Yeah, I kind of talked to a lot of the SLCs about boundaries, and one of the things that I shared with them that the Lord's been sharing with me is that boundaries aren't really about saying no to things, but they're more about finding out what you should be saying yes to and looking for ways to say yes to those things more. And one of the things that the Lord has kind of revealed to me that I needed to be saying yes to is church and community. Being an RD, there are benefits and there are positives and negatives to the job, and one of the positives is that it's very I can make my schedule, and so that's really cool. Whereas a lot of jobs, it's just strictly 8 to 4:30 or 9 to 5, and so they're very limited. Whereas with RD, while I'm on call, a lot of times I can kind of make my schedule, and so I've kind of prioritized things that are a priority to me, and one of those things is church. And so there are things that get bumped away because I know that that's a priority to me. I love to hang out with friends, but for me, I've now started to find my community within the church, and so a lot of that takes place there now. And I also love to play sports, but that's not as high a priority for me as going to church. And I love to work out, but I used to do that in the afternoons. Now I do it in the mornings, so that I can make time for those things. And so for me, it's really just been about finding the time. I make excuses sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I don't need to go to this event because I'm tired. It's been a busy week. But then either my wife will call me out, or the youth pastor will call me out, because they know what I do, and they understand the ins and outs, and they know when I'm making excuses, and they know when I'm just being honest. And so it's really just about prioritizing things, what's most important. And there are some things at church that I have to say no to, whether it be going to this meeting or that event, and I have to say, well, hey, I have a commitment to my job and I can't go to that. But I also know there are times when I can say no to other things so that I can go. And so it's been about kind of pointing out those things that I'm willing to let go of that are not as important to me as being involved in community, and then finding ways to either move those things or to cut them from my schedule. So it's a lot about sacrifice. I think a lot of it comes down to knowing your priorities. Really, for me, my priorities are, my relationship with God, my relationship with my wife, and then church and RD, wherever they kind of interact, are kind of number 3. Whereas if it were another job, it would probably be definitely church and then my job. But RD is kind of an interesting position, so they kind of play the line there. But so anything else, just kind of gets dependent on how much time I have left over. One thing that I got caught up in as an SLC and an RA and a student was looking for the perfect church. and you have all these classes telling you what the perfect church looks like and how it is, and a lot of them don't explain that the church isn't perfect. And I think one of the most important things that you can do is just find a good church that's preaching the gospel and living out the gospel, and get involved in it, and just say, I'm sticking with this. This is the body of believers that I'm choosing to be involved in, and just do it. That's been one thing for me that's been super important, because I don't necessarily think that everything about my church is perfect. There are things that I would change. There are things that I would do differently, but I know that that's my family. Those are my brothers and sisters in Christ, and that the Lord has me there for a reason, and He's given me some really cool opportunities there. So don't get so caught up in it being perfect, because you're not going to find that. And one week you're going to emphasize worship, you're like, man, I need really good worship. And you're going to go to a church and be like, preaching was good, but the worship wasn't there. And then another week you're going to be like, man, I didn't like the way they necessarily said that. And so I would just encourage you to just find a church and get involved there.